Joy, your groundbreaking research started this really important conversation around bias and ethics in AI and facial recognition. What has changed in that time? What has gone forward? Have we gone backwards? Or are we still around the same?
Yeah, I wish I could say, 5 years on, we'd made a lot of progress. And what is interesting to me is how relevant the film still is. Even when I was watching that portion where they're talking about the chatbot, Tay on Twitter, right? Some of you might have seen the headlines with Grok recently. And so I'm struck by how contemporary the conversation still is half a decade on. But I've also seen progress that speaking up actually makes a difference. So all of the US-based companies we audited, including Amazon, where you saw there was attempts to undermine the research, they all stopped selling facial recognition to law enforcement. And that's not a small accomplishment. And so for me, it does show that change is possible. Now, a major thing that has changed, right, is we have generative AI systems. And if anything we're seeing is not just a mirror of biases, but what I would call a kaleidoscope of distortion. And an example I give is from not your news org, but Bloomberg News. They did an investigation looking at stable diffusion, and they gave prompts for different types of professions. So they said, show me an AI-generated image of a CEO. Who do you think showed up? Yes, and they went on and on. But there was some diversity. If you asked for a terrorist, if you ask for a criminal suspect, right? Gender diversity, if you ask for school teachers and things of that nature. But what really struck me was, for example, in the US, women are, I want to say, around a third of architects. And it's not quite parity, but it's progress. In this study they did, women were shown as architects less than 5% of the time. And so that's what I mean about this kaleidoscope of distortion, where it's not just a mirror of society's biased, AI will reflect these biases. It's actually a downward reinforcing spiral.
I really like that kaleidoscope. It's a really good way to illustrate this problem. Caroline, we saw lots of examples in this documentary about how AI systems can really entrench these biases. What would you like to see? How can we change this? What should communities and policymakers do?
Well, so first of all, today is, by the way, the International Day of Hope. And what also,
I'm hoping for some cool air.
And some drinks afterwards.
Yes.
But I think what I'm seeing, so I work for an ethics in AI institute, right? And what gives me hope is people like you, Joy, people like us sitting here on a hot Saturday afternoon watching this documentary and actually caring about bias, about justice in AI. And I think that, this is proof we're all here, we care. And I can also see, there are people in government, there are researchers, there are people in tech who really care about this issue by now, and who want to make some change. But I also think that we really need much more evidence of what's actually happening. We need to understand how people are experiencing AI in their everyday lives. And I think we had some brilliant examples in the coded bias, with the 14-year-old boy, for example, who gets stopped. The impact that must have had on this child must have just been enormous. And I think so we must keep on understanding what people are actually experiencing, how regulation is working, and we don't have much yet, but we are seeing some developments there, like the EU AI Act, for example, right? So having more of that movement, more of the evidence, more research, that's what we want to see.
Brilliant. And Alexis, what can companies do?
Great question. I think really for these types of issues, there's no solution better than a local one. I think that can be really hard for designers and engineers and founders to take because, we're ideas people, we want to build things, and we're really incentivized to scale, especially with kind of the funding models behind a lot of tech. But I think it really takes sometimes recognizing that you don't have the best idea. So a lot of humility is what I'd like to see in fellow founders. And then also, I think it's going to take creating more opportunities like this for people to talk about these issues. And that's one of the things I really love the most about Joy's work, is that she creates these containers for people to talk about. I mean, look around, there's like way more people here than registered, which is amazing. So the more conversations we have, honestly, the better. And it's going to take founders to really like listen to that.
Great. And Joy, what's on your wish list? How can we do this in a meaningful way?
One thing that's on my wish list are biometric rights and also creative rights. I don't know if this is as apparent in the film, but in addition to being a computer scientist and AI researcher, I'm also an artist. I'm a poet, and so much of what we've seen with generative AI systems has been built on top of what some might call stolen data. Others might say contested data, depending on how far you want to go with the terminology. And so I think about what would creative rights look like, right? Where there's consent to use that work. There's a little bit of compensation, get some money, credit. So much of what we see that inspires awe in AI is a reflection of what humanity has done. And I think another critical piece on that is control, agency. Maybe you want to play around with these tools, but you actually want to play around with something that was built ethically, right? And so that's what I want to see, actual ethical AI pipelines, so that we can figure out how we use these technologies in service of our goals, for sure.
Please,
creative rights.
More of that. Thank you. Alexis, you've done some fascinating work on how to create tech that's inclusive and community-driven, like how to make breast pumps not suck.
You might need some context.
Yeah, please tell us. But I'm really interested in how can we make and build this technology in a way that is inclusive, and not just of the global north, us here in the room, but like globally. How do we do that?
Good question. For those who, the breast pump reference, I ran a series of hackathons at MIT where Joy and I were colleagues, called Make the Breast Pump Not Suck Hackathon. And it was all about kind of bringing to light these everyday technologies that people use, particularly women, that often get ignored or sidelined in favor of thinking about at the time. Bitcoin and virtual reality and AI back then. But yeah, thinking about other lived kind of everyday things. Anyway, so we brought together hundreds of nursing moms, engineers, designers over the course of 6 years to try and redesign those technologies and others. So I care quite a lot about like bringing together groups of people. I think what can we do is really talk to customers and people. They're not shy about telling you what they think about AI. I think that customers want transparency. They actually do, even those who are interested in using AI tools. They want to know if there's AI in their product and where the data comes from. I think that people kind of have a sense that they might be being force-fed AI solutions by somebody else's priorities, like investors and so forth. And then lastly, I think people want to be heard when they say that they don't want AI in their products and actually listen to, kind of like the Brooklyn Tenants Union example. Like, yeah, if they say they don't want it, pay attention to that and maybe don't force it down their throats.
Great. Joy, you're on a bit of a world tour right now. Where do we stand globally? Like, what is the status of AI technologies and maybe awareness of these risks around the world?
So this is a global tour. This is, I think, our 5th stop. We started in France, went to Taiwan, then we were in Kigali, and before this Oxford, we were in Oxford, Mississippi. And I was actually speaking to a more intimidating group than this, which was a group of first graders and kindergartners at Bramlett Elementary, where I went to school, and we screened it at the Oxford Public Library. So it was on the stage. I used to watch puppet shows and magic shows with my big brother, who came down with his family and my nieces. So it was a good time. So going from, the kindergartners and then thinking about the Global AI Summit on Africa, which was held in Kigali, I was just so encouraged when I was there, when I saw so many African leaders and also startups exploring AI in a context that made sense for them. So I was thinking about a company, Farmerline, started by Aliosis Atta, also from Ghana. Any Ghanaians in the audience? Whoop, whoop.
Woo.
Yeah. And so part of what they were doing was saying, what would it look like to make language small LLMs, now SLMs, right? And so what would it look like to make smaller models that were actually context specific? So earlier they had a text messaging platform to give farmers information, and they changed it to voice-based, and this actually allowed them to reach further. So I think they reach over 1 million farmers who help feed 2 billion people. And so I thought that was really interesting and inspiring to see what people are doing outside of some of the bubbles I find myself in, particularly in the US from time to time.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Caroline, I want to pick up on something you said. You mentioned the EU AI Act and efforts to regulate this technology globally. In the UK government and the previous government has been really pushing this sort of pro-innovation approach, whatever that means. So what do you think is really missing from this conversation around AI governance?
So I think what's missing from the conversation is still people generally. And that's something I've been hearing a lot now. We've got a lot of events in the Institute for Ethics in AI with different people. I think what we are missing, the EU AI Act is the first regulatory framework for AI that we are seeing. And human rights is at the center of that, right? Values are at the center of that. And it's a risk-based approach where we're saying, okay, particular AI systems will be high risk because they will be used, for example, for emergency services and how ambulances get dispatched. So that's how this framework works. And it's been a huge effort to get that off the ground, and that's really great. And it's one thing that gives me hope, but we now have to see how it actually works out in practice, right? And how good a framework it is. And there are some issues around that, definitely, because there might be some overregulation and there might be some underregulation in some instances. So here we'll have to watch that closely, and we've got lots of people who are doing that. But I think when it comes to regulation here in the UK, actually, yes, there is a pro-innovation approach, but what the government has also said is that regulators like the Information Commissioner or the Care Quality Commission that's looking after quality in health and social care services, that they should be looking at how AI influences them and whatever they're regulating, right? So it's the regulators who are supposed to have that oversight. And there's some regulators who are already, I feel, more on top of that. So the ICO would be, has already got some papers out and something. But the Care Quality Commission, for example, doesn't yet. And they're still quite at the beginning of trying to understand how AI now lands in health and social care services, what it actually means for the quality of care. And here, the work that I've been doing with colleagues is to understand actually working with people on the ground, so people living in care homes, people working in people's homes, with people with disabilities or so, on how the technology is helping them, but also what the risks and the harms are that they're seeing. And this is now from a bottom-up way, also helping the Care Quality Commission to understand how we need to regulate. And I think there's a huge opportunity here and a need to really work with grassroots groups so that we can understand where the risks and the harms are and the opportunities, and how can we leverage these opportunities more for governance.
Thank you. Now, I've been hearing a lot of talk from the UK government about how they want to integrate AI into public services, everything from healthcare to policing to housing. In this documentary, we saw some examples of how that's maybe not a great idea if you don't do it in a very conscious way. What would you like to see from the government? Caroline, what kind of questions should we be asking?
So what I don't want to see, and I think we're seeing that, is that AI is seen as the panacea to so many problems that we have got. Yeah. Again, let's go to health and social care. We know that there is growing demand. We've got less people working in care. So AI can be the solution here, right? But what we're seeing is that, yes, AI can support people actually who need care and support. We also know already of amazing use cases of AI in healthcare, for example, for cancer detection. But what I really want to see is that we still also invest in other solutions. In people, for example, we still want people to want to work in care. So let's invest in care workers. And care workers themselves say that. They say AI is really helping a lot of our admin work, but we also want to get paid better. We want better education. We want better, a bit better work environment. So I think here from the government, what I'm expecting them to do is to, yes, let's invest in AI. Let's invest in good evidence that it's actually effective and working for us from a human rights perspective. Yeah, so that comes first. The human comes first. And then let's also invest in communities and other solutions that's important for us as humans.
Brilliant. And Joy, how about in the US? Let's not talk about the government, what to fix there, but what's happening right now, and what kind of questions should we be asking as we deploy this technology in public services?
Yes, a few days ago, Caroline and we were at the House of Lords, and we were joined by a good friend, Dr. Alondra Nelson, who was the head of the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy in the US under the Biden administration. And so they came out with this brilliant framework called an AI Bill of Rights. So it's talking about the right to safe and effective tools. Like you're saying, it should work in the first place. The right not to be discriminated against when it comes to AI systems. The right of notice, data privacy, and I think even more importantly, human alternatives, just in case it doesn't work how we thought it was going to work. So the landscape in the US under this administration, we've seen a lot of rollbacks. For example, the Biden administration had executive orders. Actually, in the epilogue of Unmasking AI, I talk about the roundtable meeting I had with President Biden and some of the concerns that were brought up. At the same time, though, we are seeing movement at the state level. So there was a big bill that got passed in the US. Some say it's beautiful, others saw it was maybe not so beautiful. But in the push for that bill, there was actually introduced a 10-year moratorium on any AI regulation. And that would have effectively gutted so much of the progress that we've made since the film. So since the film, you had, I want to say about 12 cities that put either bans or moratoria on facial recognition use by law enforcement. The first was San Francisco, so we're calling it Ban Francisco for a little bit of time and so forth. And you also have state legislation in places like New York where it's saying there are limitations on using AI for hiring. So you have companies like HireVue that in their marketing system said, we will help you with your hiring process by looking at video of candidates and from the video inferring their problem-solving capabilities. What could go wrong? Wrote an op-ed, their legal team was not happy, but in the end, there was a complaint filed with the Federal Trade Commission, and they actually took out those that capability. And so what I'm seeing within the US context reminds me a little bit of when the Algorithmic Justice League got started in 2016. There was an election similar to the one we had, and I remember being students with Alexis and with Jaleesa, our AJL delegates at the time, before we all got our doctorates, which was a good time. And while we were there, when that election happened, it was the first time our group became cool, because in the Media Lab is the future factory. So you have opera of the future, you have people trying to genetically re-engineer mice, and we were talking about civics. So the Center for Civic Media was kind of the odd child in the corner, and then the election happened, and so many people were asking, does my work matter, right? What do we do in a moment like this where it can feel a bit powerless? And that was the moment the Algorithmic Justice League was started. And I look at all of the impact we've been able to make as a small organization and also in coalition with our sibling organizations. And that gives me so much hope, because we're literally built for these sorts of times to say that the issues people might want to erase or put behind the curtain, we're going to lift up with a whole documentary, with books, with poetry, with art exhibitions, with gatherings like this, because when the people see and they have awareness, that's what actually builds the political will for people to have a voice and a choice.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now, obviously, the responsibility in building this tech doesn't lie in just consumers or policymakers, but in companies as well. Alexis, what advice would you give founders or other companies, and how do we actually do this?
I think, yeah, I'm just going to keep on bringing it back to listening and humility and seeking out investors who are aligned with your values, which is easier said than done. I mean, I can say that with Focus Space, which, by the way, so what we are is we help people accomplish their goals in community with other people. And our session, we have like these work sessions online that are hosted by humans. When we first went out to fundraise, every single investor we talked to was like, so when are you going to replace those human hosts with AI? Every single one, hundreds of conversations. And I think we were like, I don't think you get why people are paying us or why this actually works. Like, no one feels accountable to a computer. That's not why they're showing up here. But yeah, it took, hundreds of conversations. And then it took the one conversation with the right investor who was like, I get this. And in fact, I think this is going to be even more valuable in the future. And, we're working hard to prove that correct now, and it's hard to do that. But I guess, if you're a value-driven founder, you got to keep going and you got to try, because at the end of the day, I'd rather be able to sleep at night and feel good about what I'm doing than have a bunch of money to do something that I don't believe in, that I think could harm people. So there's that. And then, talking to customers and people all the time. And like I said, they're not shy. Actually, before I came to this gathering, I emailed all of our community. And I was like, hey, I'm going to this panel about AI and the future. Like, what do you guys think? And I got hundreds of emails from our members. And it was really interesting. It spanned quite the range. Like, I got some, layoffs have really impacted our community as a work product. So a lot of people concerned about their jobs. We have a lot of creatives and freelancers. They're, seeing their entire industry gutted right now. But then at the same time, we have a lot of folks with ADHD in our community or who are neurodivergent. And they were telling me that some of these tools really help them organize their thoughts and make progress on their work and their goals. So it's really a range, but we just gotta listen and stop forcing AI solutions where they don't belong. Yeah.
And Caroline, what can institutions like Oxford do to make this problem better?
Well, so first of all, when it comes to, we're educating here who often are leaders in computer science, in policy, in lawmaking, and so on. So, and I think the role of a university like Oxford is not only to educate people, it's to make them into responsible leaders, into people who have that awareness around ethics, not as an afterthought, but as something that, is the first stepping stone, so to say, to be aware of risks of harms, to care about that. I think we have a really special role to play. Secondly, I think we're also an institution that we provide, or you're supposed to provide, independent evidence and high quality research, which I think is so important in the age of AI. So for example, if governments are saying, oh, this is a great solution of AI in healthcare, for example, it's our job to see, well, is that actually true? So get some independent evidence. I also think that we have a really special role to play in bridging gaps between what I'm seeing often is still quite an elite topic, AI computer scientists working in their labs, and also AI ethicists, and then people, grassroots communities and so on, to bridge that gap, to bring people in, public engagement, to create a common language that we can all speak. And I think here, again, Oxford has a really important role to play. And I think today is also a really important event for us to bridge that gap, to bring us all together.
Joy, I'd love to hear your advice for everyone in this room. What can we do on an individual level?
Do you want to join the fight for algorithmic justice? Do you want to become an agent of change? I think one thing I've learned through this journey, and even watching the film again with all of you, I was hovering upstairs and watching you all watch the film, which is the fun part for me, is the power of story. And so this starts with the story, right, of literally coding in a white mask. And it also starts with the decision to talk about it. Because I'm a tech nerd, I was very much happy to say tech is apolitical, give me the numbers, let me code, leave me alone. I got into computer science because I didn't want to deal with people. People are messy, right? So this was not the path I planned initially. But So in doing all of that, I realized how important it was that even though I felt uncomfortable, because I didn't want to be the person going on about racism, sexism, all these isms, I wanted to code. I wanted to build cool things. And as I was trying to build my cool thing, this Aspire Mayor, as you saw the whole documentary, right? You know how the story goes. That's what happened. And I think about the Brooklyn tenants, right, sharing their stories as well. So the power of narrative, the power of not just a single voice, but a voice in community. Because something we hear often with the Algorithmic Justice League is when people see other people's stories, they're like, oh, I'm not alone. I thought I messed up, right? Or there was something happening, or it's okay to speak up. One thing we do with AJL is we have a harms reporting platform. We say harms and triumphs, but we haven't gotten that many triumphs. So it's essentially a harms reporting platform. And there we are able to hear from who we call the X-coded, so otherwise exploited, condemned, convicted, harmed by AI systems. And no one is immune from being X-coded. I think about the deep fakes of Taylor Swift or Tom Hanks, right? Celebrity won't save you, race, gender, all of these things. We're in it together when we're thinking about AI harm. So I think what we can all do is share our stories and share our experiences, positive, negative, confusing, when it comes to AI, because then we form those narratives that allow us to build community and build power. So with all the things you could do, literally sharing your stories, I think still remains crucial and accessible.
Thank you. Alexis, in your work doing community-led innovation, what have you seen? How can people tangibly, be part of this conversation in building tech that works for them?
Great question. I think it takes those of us who create gatherings to make sure they're welcoming and inclusive, and that people actually want to show up and feel like they can contribute. I think that, to use Joy's name again, I think that just joy as a concept and play and creativity are great ways to invite people into conversations about building the future. Because obviously there's a lot of scary stuff involved with this, but yeah, I like to create spaces for adults to be creative. And I think that we need some joy and play just as much as kids do. So that's one way. And then, just the idea that all of us are builders and makers and designers and creatives in our everyday lives, all of us. So just remembering that is in each of us. And
Great. Caroline, are there any initiatives in the UK that people can do or to kind of be part of this?
Part of everything?
Making AI more equitable, fair, ethical.
So, yes, I do actually think, there are, and I was saying that on Thursday when we had our event at Westminster, for that event, when I curated the group of people who were coming, I had troubles to find civil society groups. And I know they're out there, but I think they need to, I'm a researcher. I'm also an investigative journalist, so I should really know how to find these groups. And I found it quite difficult. I think we need to, make sure that people know where to go and join groups. I think we also need to create opportunities for people to make their voices heard in the community. So I know that some researchers who are doing that. I'm doing that. I work with community groups, older people's community groups and so on to really make voices heard. But yeah, I think in the end, again, it's agents of change, people taking on that role for themselves, caring about this topic and also drawing others along with them. And I think we can all create also our own kind of spaces, activities. If you're part of Oxford University, there are different ways, and engage with us, the Institute for Ethics in AI. And so I think there are lots of opportunities, but we also need to make sure that people find them and know how to create their own spaces. And then,
Brilliant.
Can I add one thing to that?
Please.
I had Jaleesa's voice in my head when I was answering that, because I was talking about spaces for adults to contribute to the conversation. But Jaleesa over there is a high school teacher, college teacher, amazing mentor of young people. And I'm seeing some young people here in the front, and I'm just thinking this is not just our conversation. You folks are going to be inheriting this world soon. So I think getting more young people involved is also going to be really important too.
Yeah, actually, on Monday, wow, it's been a long week, we did a workshop with MBA All-Star and his nonprofit. And so we were with middle schoolers and high schoolers, and we have a workshop that actually allows people to interact with AI and see how AI reads their face, and then see if you might shift your gender, shift your age, go invisible. The big kids, Jaylen Brown, he was having the most fun with it as well. But it was really an interesting way to kind of break down that wall where you're inviting people in with levity, with play, and also saying we can interrogate these systems and we can think about alternative systems to build, for sure.
That's brilliant. Going back to education and play, I want to dwell on your time at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar.
Ah, yes.
Those were quite formative years. Can you tell us, what did you learn and how did that help you, in this journey you're on?
Yeah, well, I was just at the warden's office, and I remember having to, show my final report to the warden. Thankfully, it was distinction, but I feel a little pressure when I enter the space. And we used to do meet and mingles in this room, and we would have formal events and dinners and things like that. So I've been definitely just having all kinds of memories being within the space. And I remember with my scholarship, I was not very focused. I came in African studies, but before then I had lived in Zambia, and I was doing a Fulbright fellowship where I was working on teaching Zambian youth how to code. And so when I came from that context and landed into African studies in the Oxford University context, I went to the first class. I was like, this is not for me. But I'm here, so what do I do? So I rushed to Mary Eaton's office, the registrar, told her I might have made a mistake. And the next Monday, I was enrolled in the education department in learning and technology. And so that was a much better fit for me because so much of the work I had been doing in Zambia leading up fit. Then the second year came around, and because that was a one-year program, the learning and technology, I got into global health. You can read in the book the global health stuff. We don't have too much time for all these detours, but I realized I didn't really want to do it. I had applied because I could, and there was funding. So I proposed an alternative, which was a year of service. I wrote a 40-page proposal. I wasn't sure if I could get the visa to do it, but long story short, it worked out, and that was my second year, and I hear the program still continues. And so I think I took from that experience here and being a Rhodes Scholar was, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to shift. And even this research, it's not what I started at MIT aiming to do. There's a theme here, right? So I came in thinking, I'll continue some of the learning and technology education kind of work. But as I was doing that work, I was also doing these art projects, and it started pulling me. And my supervisor, the older grad students, the Methuselahs that were still there saying, you don't switch, that's how you never graduate, were telling me, don't switch your topic, it can be a side project. And of course I didn't listen, so I did the project, and I'm so glad that I didn't let the inertia of what already had momentum and was a clear path stop me from pursuing where my curiosity actually was. And I think that can be hard, especially when you're in places that are so elevated and you are told you're smart and all of these other things. It can become a straitjacket, right? Titles can become a straitjacket. And so being able to say, stripping away everything that I have or how other people perceive me, what is it that's truly compelling? And for me, when I was looking at facial recognition, I was also thinking about the communities. And so the people who are telling me not to pursue this, they weren't from the communities that I was from, and they weren't seeing the issues in the way that I was seeing it. And so that also gave me a little bit of extra support as well. I also grew up with a mother who would destroy her paintings and smash her sculptures. So I was like, okay, I can't hold on too much to what I thought would be there. So I think all of those things sort of informed me that the process of creation, who you become as a creator, is as important and sometimes even more important than the creation. So you might be working on something and your curiosity draws you somewhere else. You might be called unfocused. I'm always called unfocused, right? But that might actually allow you to start something that's quite necessary and impactful in the world.
Some great lessons there. Now, I have a quick fire round for all of you, but before we start, we have time for some questions. So if you have any, start thinking, and we'll get to them right after this. Now, I want to hear from all of you. One thing about AI that keeps you up at night that people should really be paying attention to, but maybe aren't. And one thing that gives you hope for the future of the technology. All right, ready? Alexis, do you want to kick off?
Sure. First, I have to admit something. I don't really use AI in my work at all, which is kind of interesting. Because I really enjoy writing, and I get a lot of urging from people, why not use AI tools to do it? And I don't, because for me, a lot of it is in like the process and writing as a thinking tool. So I don't. So I have a little bit of insecurity about talking about the hope for AI. And that's, I think, why I ask my community a lot about how they're using it, because I don't really. But what keeps me up at night, I think, just because of the community that I serve, is like how it's impacting people's jobs. And in the United States, your job is tied to your healthcare, is tied to so many things. So it's really like life and death for a lot of people. And I don't think we have good solutions for that. So that's what keeps me up at night.
And what gives you hope?
Oh, what gives me
Dr. Hope, what gives you
I
hope?
think young people, to get back to, some of the conversations that Jaleesa and I have about, her work and all the times I get to work with students. I think they're really creative, and I think tough times make for really creative people and people who can think of new ways to solve problems. So I think that does. Yeah.
Brilliant. Caroline, would you like to go next?
Yeah, what does keep me up at night is the power of private corporations, and that AI is in their hands, and that we don't see that responsible leadership in many of these companies yet. So that really does keep me up at night, and what we can do about that, and how it might influence, and it does influence, democracy and so on. What gives me hope? I think what gives me hope is that I also see opportunities in AI to build on what really matters to us as humans, to bring communities together, to find common grounds, to influence policy that works for us. And I've seen that in some examples. We're also working with Ambassador Audrey Tang, who was here earlier, might still be here, who's been doing that in Taiwan, for example. And seeing that potential, that gives me hope.
Brilliant. And Joy?
What keeps me up at night? Lethal autonomous weapon systems keep me up at night. And I remember a few years ago serving on the EU Global Tech Panel and actually having one of my poems, AI Ain't I Woman, shown to ministers of defense, because we're at a time where some will say the future of peace. The other side of that is the future of war, where people are looking at how you integrate AI systems, right? And you already have AI systems being used to target individuals, and to do it at a way that's so much faster than humans can. So at the end, generally the argument is, if you have more precise systems, fewer people will die. But we've never had a military technology introduced that led to fewer deaths. That's just not what history shows. So that certainly keeps me up at night. And now that we let that sink in, what gives me hope? I would like to end with a poem on what gives me hope. And this is a poem that I actually wrote to the Brooklyn tenants because they inspired me, and you saw some of their journey in the documentary. So are you ready? Yeah. Also, all of you keep me hope because you're here, it's hot, and we're still going. All right. So to the Brooklyn tenants, resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces. We celebrate your courage, no silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, a screening at Rhodes House, hallway gatherings, Sharpies and posters, coalitions, petitions, research and potlucks, dancing and music. Everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around that world, that means you persisting and prevailing against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of math destruction. We stand with you in gratitude. You demonstrate the people have a voice and a choice. When defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights, the victory is ours. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, any questions? Put your hand up and we'll get a mic to you. Why don't we get here, front row, front row privilege.
Thank you so much.
And the best fan in the house, can we get a hand for this fan? Woo! Best fan in the house.
Thank you all so much for such an inspiring and kind of terrifying talk. My name is Amani. I'm the founder of Muslim Girl, which is a media platform for Muslim women in America. And we're also in the process of launching Digital Assembly, which is a think tank for the rights of digital citizens in the metaverse, looking at international human rights law not applied to private corporations, but rather looking at social media as the new public domain. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, obviously in the work that we do, like I said, quite terrifying, but also a little hopeful, is I'm sure you've all heard about this moment that intersected the work that we do, which is a couple of months ago when 2 women of color Microsoft employees or Microsoft AI employees interrupted the 50th anniversary event to protest the use of Microsoft's AI in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And Dr. Joy, much to what you said, not only were these women fired from their roles and possibly blacklisted from the tech world, but also Microsoft didn't even dignify it with any type of response or reaction, just continued forward with their work. And so I wanted to ask, especially because you touched upon so many themes that we should be concerned about that have only exponentially been amplified in the past 5 years since this film came out. And in ways that are even more oppressive, especially towards brown and black communities and the global South. Are we looking at an unstoppable train here when it comes to AI? Is this inevitable, or is it simply that the law and regulations haven't caught up with it yet?
Thank you for that. Joy, would you like to take that?
Sure, I'll put on my Dr. Bullawini hat for this one. So I remember serving on the EU Global Tech panel with Brad Smith, president of Microsoft. And I remember at some point, the Algorithmic Justice League, we were talking to many of the big tech companies around stopping harmful use of facial recognition in contexts like lethal autonomous systems and so forth. And I remember something that their head of communication said that struck with me, and I think something I see often when it comes to advocacy spaces with AI in these sorts of scenarios is, what did they say? We will not abandon the American soldier in the time of need. And I also saw within our advocacy work in the US context, when we were building momentum, oftentimes there would be, yes, we can do all of those things, but we must have a national security exception. And so I think there is kind of a sense that if we integrate these technologies and we become the superpower, it still goes down to military power. So who will have the most powerful AI in service of maybe innovation, right? But there's also in service of war and power. And so it actually inspired a poem called Precisely Who Will Die. If we will have drinks after this, and elderflower for people like me who don't drink elderflower juice, but if you will permit me to share one more poem. Okay, it's a little heavy. It's called Precisely Who Will Die. Some say AI is an existential risk. We see AI as an exterminating reality, accelerating annihilation, augmenting destruction. I heard of a new gospel delivering death with the promise of precision, the code name for an old aim to target your enemy, the other, reduced to rubble. Face erased, name displaced as drones carry on in a formation that spells last shadow. AI wars first fought at the doors of our neighbors. Next, the bombs drop on your private chambers. Cease to believe fire on fire will deliver peace. Precisely who will die, zeroed out by ones and guns.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Let's go to the back. All right, okay, here we go. Guy in the white shirt, please. And just a request, could we keep the questions brief? I want to get as many of you as possible.
Just continuing along the line of AI as a weapon of mass destruction. I'm a PhD student here studying AI and quantum computing. And never have I felt more powerless. Because in the end, I don't own the means of production. It is wealthy billionaires who decide what AI is going to be used for. And much like the citizens of this country couldn't stop UK from sending bombs to Gaza, much like Americans couldn't stop, the government from sending bombs to Gaza, much like the employee at Google and Amazon couldn't stop the $1.2 billion worth of contract with Israeli military from happening, much like the Rhodes Scholar in this house couldn't stop the Rhodes Trust from investing in company directly complicit in genocide. How can we today, not as researchers, but also as everyday people, organize to stop the general trend of descent into a techno-oligarchy fascism that we're living in today? Because I'm born and raised in China. I know very well that there is no algorithm justice in a fascist state, because there's no justice in a fascist state. There's no justice in a fascist institution. How do we organize and how do we regain that power, that hope that you were talking about?
Yeah, great question. I honestly think part of it is gatherings like this, because that is how fascism wins, when people feel powerless. And even within corporate power, I remember Meredith Whittaker, who's now the president of Signal. When she was at Google, they actually organized against Project Nimbus, and they were able to push that to stop. I even remember when we were going up against Amazon, and we would have activist board members reach out and so forth. So I do think a part of it is thinking through the governance structures that we have for AI companies, because right now we do see this consolidation of power where it is difficult to push back. But I do think if enough people mobilize, there is still the opportunity to push back, because I've seen it. Companies have been very strategic. At first, they said, okay, we'll capitulate a little bit. We'll do a little AI ethics group. And so I remember my dear friend, Timnit Gebru, Dr. Gebru, and the work that they were doing at Google, right? They had the AI ethics team co-led by Meg Mitchell. And when, we're talking about facial recognition, that wasn't the cash cow. Once you start talking about BERT, once you start getting into large language models or their paper stochastic parrots, that was even talking about the environmental footprint. Then it got too close, right, to the source of power. And so we saw them being expelled. But even given all of those examples, I'm still hopeful, because we're here, right? It wouldn't have been unimaginable to Cecil Rhodes for me to be here. There's a reason I wanted a screen, Coded Bias, at Rhodes House, knowing what that history is. So I do think we can reclaim spaces and reshape narratives towards what we want it to be, and we have to continue doing that.
Thank you. All right. Lady at
Other panelists can answer questions too.
Your answers are so good.
Yeah.
Team effort, team effort.
A lady at the front with the yellow glasses, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Georgette Graham. I'm a lawyer turned data scientist, currently working in AI policy and financial regulation. So this is probably a lighter question from what we've been hearing. It's more of a comment and then a light question. And Joy, you mentioned the power of story. And I want to say I traveled all the way from London just to see this, even though I've seen it before. Because a few years ago, watching this on Netflix actually inspired me to do that career switch, to move to the technical space to try to understand these things. And now I'm actually in AI policy and financial regulation, which is actually allowing me to have a voice and to say we need to consider these things. So it's largely to say thank you. These things are good, and this turnout has been amazing. So my question is quickly, not just for Dr. Joy, but also Alexis, Caroline, you can jump in. Recently, we've seen like a shift from AI safety to AI security because AI is such a geopolitical tool. You've mentioned weapons and everything. I want to ask, how is this like impacting the work of the algorithm, the AJL? Like, do you have to change strategy? Has it been difficult, or do you think you're more or less at the same place? And more broadly, how is it impacting just the discourse on AI and ethics?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do a quick response and then hear from the fellow panelists. We decided to go global. I'm on a world tour. So when I got the very kind invitation to become an inaugural fellow for the Accelerator Fellowship, which you can speak more to, I thought this is a great opportunity to start thinking about the Algorithmic Justice League on more global terms. And so that's actually what in part inspired the world tour. So from Paris to Taiwan, to Rwanda, to Mississippi. And then here we're hoping next to be in Brazil. There's a wonderful woman from Brazil. I think she's up there, right? So we're exploring other places to go, Kenya as well. And we're hoping to also have do-it-yourself independent screenings and so forth. So our response has been to go global because we know the conversation matters more than just in the echo chamber that can be the United States.
Thank you. Caroline, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the pivot from safety to security that we're seeing in AI right now.
Well, so I would say that, first of all, yeah, we've pivoted away from AI safety, and I think we really should welcome that, because what that meant is putting it all onto sort of AI ethics, onto the technology and people who are creating the technology to make the technology safer and more transparent and so on. But now we are seeing a shift into by far more values. Yeah, it's not just security, it's human rights. We're seeing that and well-being and so on. And that means that we're broadening up the discussion around AI ethics and what that actually means. And I think so, looking at some of the centers that are around the world, and also here at Oxford Institute for Ethics in AI, we're an interdisciplinary, so we are very much rooted in philosophy. So we're asking these questions of what is a good society, what does good look like, right, from a philosophical point of view. But we're an interdisciplinary team of researchers coming at it from a legal perspective, from a sociological perspective, and then all sorts of different topics and sectors and so on. And the Accelerator program is all about bringing people who are not working in academia necessarily, but also other academics in and to work with us. And that may be civil society groups, that may be technologists, and, really cross-sectoral. And I think that we're seeing more of a trend in AI ethics to be interdisciplinary, to work from the bottom up, to engage people and to open up that conversation away from just one value, such as safety, to many values. That kaleidoscope that you were talking about earlier.
Thank you. Yes, Alexis.
I'm thinking about it a lot lately from like a psychological perspective, I think, because I'm building a space where people are coming together to get support from other humans and give support to other humans. And I think a lot about how people are using, GPT as like a validation machine, that kind of thing. And on the one hand, like, I don't blame people for doing that. I think it's very hard. Like, a lot of people don't have supportive or validating voices in their lives. And sometimes like GPT validating them is like the most positive thing that they'll hear all day, which is pretty sad. So I'm kind of trying to think about like building spaces for real people to talk that have better cultures of support so that we don't outsource all of those psychological needs on large language models. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question. Guy at the very back, please. Yes, you.
Thank you. The documentary, it reinforces the idea that our design and creation is often an extension of ourselves. And there's this saying amongst anti-racist activists that a kid will play with anybody until somebody tells them not to. So I just want to say something about AI and coded bias, like you said. Do you think that inclusion in the sense of competent diversity solves this problem?
No, because you can be included into erasure. You can be included into being targeted. Because I started with facial recognition technologies, which can be technologies of mass surveillance. And when you think about biometric systems in general, the easy answers were, oh, make a more inclusive data set, but inclusive towards what sense, right? So now going back to lethal autonomous weapons, we got a few issues. Right. So one, if it doesn't identify the right person, that's a problem. But okay, so in the hands of an authoritarian government, precisely who will die, right, when you are included. So in the book, I actually have a chapter called The Cost of Inclusion and also the cost of exclusion. So there might be some computer vision people in the room. I think about autonomous vehicles. There was actually a study that came out of Oxford showing that the vertically challenged people like me and some of the kids were less likely to be detected than people who were taller. They also looked at Georgia Tech, they looked at skin type, right? So if we are increasingly thinking about what the future of autonomous vehicles might look like, there's a cost to that exclusion. And so I don't think it is as straightforward as saying, we make more technically inclusive systems or technically precise systems, because again, precisely who is the system designed for, but also what power does it support? So I think even I like to point out that I built the Aspire mirror that didn't detect my face. Right, I was a student at MIT exploring different projects at the Media Lab, and part of why I built that system was also the tools that were available at the time. So even if you're within the institutions, are the patterns, are the processes that you are being led to, even created with people like you in mind in the first place. Right, so I go to GitHub, I download what was there, which was this JavaScript library that would allow me to detect a face. Even now, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, they released a paper showing most of the open source computer vision systems that are used for face detection still have high levels of bias when it comes to skin type. Maybe good for those lethal autonomous weapons situations, cost of exclusion, cost of inclusion, maybe not so great for the autonomous driving situation. And so that's where values come into place. And that's why we have to frame these issues as what they are, which are socio-technical systems. So finally put on my computer science hat. And I have to say, it really wasn't until grad school when I was exploring these issues that I even really started interrogating the politics of technology or where my place was. Again, I didn't want to be involved with messy humans. Lead me to the algorithm. Let's figure this out in a terminal. And so I think it is important to have that socio-technical approach, which often doesn't allow for just straightforward technical fixes as enticing as they might seem on the surface.
Thank you. On that really important note, thank you. Please give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists.